Oh yeah, so this dude Nick joins the cast, and obviously because of his energy, he's given a pretty principal role. And I'd never really gotten to know him up until this point. Like I said, I'd met him a couple of times, and then we became firm friends, me and Nick. Man, crazy dude. We put on Fiddler on the Roof, and it's a pretty dope success. And very soon we're coming back to do Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and soon after that I did Malaika, for which it was the first time I actually had a type like main lead role.
Malaika.
Yeah.
So dude, let me say, at this time you're a full-fledged actor.
Pretty much.
Theatrical.
You could say that. Because
is it called thespian?
You could say that. I mean, I'm a bit partial to that word because it's thrown around so loosely now.
What's a thespian? What for you? What?
I actually don't know, but I feel like there needs to be some level of mastery. I can look for the definition. Continue talking. But there needs to be some element of mastery and devotion to the craft that is not just for Oko.
You just don't just throw it out like that.
Nah, you don't just. But
there's some level of
those words that people like to use. So. A thespian, what is an actor or an actress? It just simply means someone that has something related to drama in the theatre. So yeah, you could say I was.
But you feel like you need some
thespian needs
some
you don't just wake up and say you're a thespian. Malaika was a lead. Well, the title role of Malaika was another original Kenyan production. I don't think it was very good in retrospect, story-wise. But I got to play opposite Becky Mwikya, who was a good friend of mine as well.
Becky was an actor?
Yeah. And singer. She sang and danced and acted.
Becky Nigeria. I call her Becky Nigeria.
Becky Nigeria, that one, yeah. Becky, who's now doing all this pretty good stuff in Nigeria.
Production-wise.
Yeah. But at the point we were doing Malaika, Sterling Q had become a little bit tiring by this point. I was still looking for a project, for a project that would really just amsha me. And one day I'm walking home from church in Tao on Kenyatta Avenue, and I get to the junction that has that side road that leads to Macmillan Library. So Macmillan Library is on my left. I'm heading towards Afya Center, where I take a march to go home to South Sea. And just in front of Macmillan, there is an entire movie set. I'm talking about lights, crew, camera, and actors and people walking around, and it was the lights. It was big, huge lights, and not far away there's a generator from film studios, and I didn't know what was going on at the time. There's a red convertible that was parked on the road that was being reversed and being put in position for the shot. A red convertible. And everything looked so big and majestic. And it took me back to when I was a kid, and I would wake up and try and make sure that I was having breakfast by 6:30 a.m. because at 6:30 on CNN was a show called Showbiz Today. And I loved watching Showbiz Today because it took you behind a lot of behind the scenes of films. And let's imagine, off the top of my head, a film like Lethal Weapon 2 was coming out. They covered it on Showbiz Today. They had interviews with Mel Gibson, they had interviews with Danny Glover, and then they would have what I realize now is promotional material, which is a lot of behind the scenes footage of the film. And
which for an actor at the time was golden.
Yeah, it was. Because for someone who was aspiring actor, you were like, whoa, look at that, look at all the lights, look at all the action. And I walked by Macmillan and it was like I was transported back. This was not as much an E.T. moment as it was a this is showbiz in the making. I would later find out that the film that was being shot was called Rasta. It was a short film that had a pretty decent budget. That had a pretty decent budget that was based loosely on Nazizi Hirji, musician. Yeah, it was based loosely on a day in the life where she was talking about how she wanted to go out and perform at this such competition.
So what did that experience do to you?
Well, I would later find out that this was a film that was being... This was a short film. It was a short film, a short fiction film, but loosely based on an incident, I think, that had happened with Nazizi. So it was loosely based on Nazizi. And it was a story about how she really wanted to go out to some hip-hop contest somewhere where she was going to go and battle some people and then win, or perform and then win, and how difficult it was for her to leave the house because of one reason or the other. I can't remember the details. But the film was called Rasta, and it was directed by this young Kenyan filmmaker who was still pretty fresh on the Kenyan scene after her studies at UCLA.
None
other than Manori Kahio. But you know that ET feeling I told you? I hadn't felt that feeling in a while. And the feeling just came back to me when I saw that. I saw this set, and I mean, you know, to the extent of I was able to identify that red car, and I saw it in a newspaper because I was like, I went home, I can't go onto a set and ask what are they shooting, that sort of thing. So what I did was go home and then wait for the papers on Friday or Saturday of the next week when they had the art scene. And there was a picture of this wide-eyed, it's always the eyes, they always have wide eyes. This wide-eyed filmmaker called Wanuri Kahio who was making this film called Rasta. And I remembered what my original dream was. It was to end up on a screen role, even if there was not much of a screen industry going on then. A few months later, we heard about an NGO-related TV show, but was not going to have NGO speak. It was actually going to be a TV show that addressed the issue of sexual habits with young people and the prevalence or the risk that we all are at of catching HIV. That series was called Heartbeat FM. And it was the first screen role that I went and auditioned for. I didn't get the role that I was going for. I wanted one of the principal roles. And I remember this role meaning a lot to me because I thought, if I get hired on this and I have a main role, I'll actually consider quitting my advertising job to be on this thing full time. Yeah. I was like, I would actually think about doing that. It's something I would consider doing. But I didn't have to because I didn't get one of the principal roles, and the role that I ended up getting was night shoots only. So I was going back and forth between work and the location, and I had 2 or 3 shooting days, and Heartbeat FM ended up being the result of that work.
What role did you get in this particular play? I mean, it's
and
not a screen.
So what it meant?
Screenplay.
It was a screen. Well, screenplay is the name of the script, you know, that someone writes. But this was a screen role for a TV show that was pretty high budget. They were bringing in a director from Britain who'd worked on some long series forms. I think he was on the team of this show called the EastEnders.
Wow, EastEnders was huge.
Yeah.
EastEnders is the neighbors of the UK.
Of Brito, yeah. So he had some role in that, and he was coming as a director to shoot this. And he was the first person I asked, hey, I really wanted that lead role and I didn't get it, and was I terrible in the audition? And he didn't like that I asked him that question because he was like, you don't understand, that's not how it works. Auditions are a lot more subjective in ways other than did you put on a good performance or not. And I was like, oh, okay, so I guess I just learned something new, and I also ended up pissing off a director in the process. But Heartbeat FM was also another special project because it's introduced people to more new talent. this gentleman called Ezekiel Onyi, we call him Ezekiel Onyi. He now works with Film Queen Africa. I can't remember a lot of people from that show, but it was a good show. It was a really, really good show.
How many days did it take you to film?
I filmed for 3 days. I was playing the role of a casino manager. Not a casino manager, but the employee of a casino manager. And I remember the director being pretty impressed by my performance. And this is the first time I was doing a stage gig. And not a stage gig, but a screen gig. And it was pretty high budget. So I showed up on set. And there they were. The lights, the camera, the props being moved around, a crew, people on radios, everyone just doing their thing. And me getting into my costume. And I was that little boy again. Like, I'm getting into costume and I'm about to get onto a set. And action and boom. And dude, I was so psyched up and so inexperienced. I wasn't waiting for the director to call action. It was the sound of the slate, the clapper, clack, that was getting me into. So it was like scene one, scene one, take 5. Mark it, and then I'd start acting. And the director had to keep telling me, wait for action. And I'm like, yeah, I know, I'm sorry. But dude, I really think I killed that role. I don't know where that footage is. I don't have any of it anywhere. But it felt really good. Many days, many weeks later, tuning into KBC and watching myself.
That must have been cool.
That was.
And what year is this now?
This was 2006 or 2007. And at this point, I was making plans to now leave the country and go and study.
So, I've met you. I've now met you.
By this point, we've met.
I know that is because, again, I've not heard you talk about church.
Yeah.
I'm aspiring rapper. Come to this church called Baptist, and Baptist gave me my first opportunity to perform Close Your Eyes.
I had no idea. Okay, so a bit of backstory to this. Now, I'd left all over I'd wound up. I was dealing with my own feelings and issues about what ministry ought to be or what Christianity ought to be. And I ended up leaving the church I was going to at that point, St. Andrews, because I was dissatisfied with, there was a lot of shit going on there as well. And I was like, let me go to a church where at least I have seen that it appears to really take care of its congregants, and it appears that they know what they're doing and they're cool and they're hip and they're all about ministry. And I was like, I'll go and join Nairobi Baptist. By this point, I'd befriended Pastor Mulandi, and a lot of Bapo people knew me because of Olova. And I remember thinking Bapo was this cool church and I'd probably never be able to break in and start a social life there. But the fact that I had been a dancer.
Because me, when I walked in, you were one of the cool kids.
I was, but that's simply because of the years in Olova. Otherwise, if I just walked in as hi, then it would have been really, 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 really hard to break in.
I really struggled to break into Bapo.
Until that day?
No.
Even afterwards?
Even after that, that's why I gravitated to Mavuno so instantly. Bapo can be very cliquey.
Bapo was at that point, I don't know about now, but it was cliquey.
It could have finished you.
It was hard, but now, because I had been on that stage a few times, I had auditioned for a couple of the productions that they did there, and I ended up in a couple of, the ones that I was talking about, Light Gap, these concerts. I ended up in a few of them, and it felt nice. So I'm getting reacquainted with the church and trying to get acting off the ground, and things seemed like they were going pretty smoothly. All was well. And then this acquaintance, this connection that I had made with Mose, having worked with him on Olova, started to come through when Kubamba was growing and they needed someone to MC and help them out with some gigs. And so that's how I ended up hanging out with a lot of the Kubamba crew at that point. And then my boy David Courier tells me about this plan that he has to start an online magazine, an online publication called moafrica.com. And he asked me, yo, you know, you have some experience with the stage. Would you like to stage manage this thing? At this point, I have no idea what a stage manager does. What does a stage manager do? And I didn't want to appear too ignorant. And I was like, I found a smart way to ask the question. I was like, okay, so then what would you require of me in the role of stage manager? And he says, well, you know, I've called in a lot of favors. David Curry had called in a lot of favors. A lot of people supporting him and performing for free on the launch of this online publication. And an online publication, that's such a new idea. Like an online publication where people are going to find out about what's happening on the gospel scene, and it was going to be updated daily. And he said, what I want to do is incorporate event recaps, community threads, and album reviews. And I think this is where the industry, and event recaps and event reviews as well. And I've lined up all these artists, and he had a whole bunch of really amazing artists, man. I can't name them all, but there was a number of them. I remember even he was able to bring in even Kapudha. Kapudha was going to perform for free. He had some rappers on there. It was a whole bunch of people. And I decided I was going to stage manage it for him. And the cleverness of this gig was, it was the first MC-less gig with an MC. There was no MC. So the whole story about it was that Goi was supposed to be the MC. And what they were doing was, they had a voiceover saying, we're sorry, our MC has not arrived. Let's check up on him. And they had all this pre-shot footage of Goi waking up late.
That was actually so creative.
It was very, very creative. And this was in 2006. We hadn't seen anything like this before. And they had all this pre-shot footage of Goi trying to make his way to Sitam, to Nairobi Pentecostal Church, where this event was happening. And he meets this taxi driver who was played by a friend of mine called Sarah Muhoho. And this taxi driver had lots of moods. And she was like, why are you giving me a hard time? I don't even want you as a passenger. What are you talking about? And he's like, all I need to do is get to this function. And there was a lot of funny gigs, funny little jokes along the way. But we had to coordinate this to perfection, so that Goi had on the same clothes that he had in the video. And the end of this whole skit was, Goi was supposed to, towards the end of the gig, finally make his way to Bapo. And they pre-shot that footage of making his way to Sitam. And they had this pre-shot footage of him getting to the door of Sitam and walking in, and me being the stage manager had to coordinate and make sure he got in at that exact time and walk up to the stage and now give an apology and say, I'm sorry guys. And that was the launch of MAfrica. It was amazing. So David was like, hey, that went well. If you could help me write a few reviews. So I wrote reviews for Zaidi ya Mziki.
What?
Yeah, I wrote the review for the album Zaidi ya Mziki, and it was such a good album. I wrote a review for, do you remember this artist called Lucas Imari?
Yep.
Who showed up and then I don't know where he went.
He was from States.
Yeah, he was from Stato, and he wanted to...
In fact, even he wanted to sign Zaidi ya Mziki.
He did, and then that didn't go very far. So I wrote the album review for his album, and the reviews were received really well. And so one day David is coming to Bapo and he wants to shoot a few things, and he told me about this rapper called A-Star. And Yafesi, who was working at Hope FM, I think, by this point.
Yeah.
Yes, I think he was working at Hope.
He was working at Hope.
Yes. Yafesi was on the front line. Like he had front row seats to all these new artists. And so he had told me about this artist called Dana Seda on this newly formed Kijiji Records. And I remember watching Dana Seda and being like, this guy's amazing. And then we heard about this rapper called A-Star, who'd done this song called Close Your Eyes, and he was coming to perform in Bapo. So David Courier was like, yo, I have my camcorder, I'd like to record him. So I want you to, can you film him, please? And I was like, sure. So I took this camcorder and I was sat on the front row. Bapo was my church by this point, so I was pretty comfortable with being in there. And I filmed this guy perform this song. And watching him perform, I had completely forgotten what it's like to get so caught up in a performance. Because after he performed the third verse, I kid you not, Richie, this kid called Esther, opened his eyes at the end of the third verse and sort of had to recalibrate, like reacquaint himself with where he was. And it's almost like he got so caught up in the performance, he opened his eyes like, oh, I'm back. Shucks, sorry, did I lose you guys for a moment? Did you guys lose me for a moment? Are we here? Are we together? And the audience was watching spellbound. And they clapped before the song was over. Just because of that moment. It was so powerful. And I was close up of you, Richie, as you were coming back, like, what happened? And I was like, I want to get to know this dude. He seems like a cool dude. At this point, Kijiji was really trying to sink its hands into this budding industry with all these young musicians. So they had found Dana Seda, they had found Richie, they had found this young dude called Riga, and then they'd found this rapper. Oh, they'd found another lady, FMC, is that what they're called? They'd found an MC called Michelle. And then they had found another dude who had come straight out of Dandora and didn't seem to fit within this demographic, but he was a part of hip-hop history with Ukoflani Mau Mau, and his name was Giuliani. Now, at this point, I was preparing to leave for the States to study. But I was already doing a little bit of work for David, and then I ended up doing a little bit of work for Mose, emceeing some of his functions. And here I was again in the front line of all this new stuff that was coming out of gospel. And I was like, I'm not involved as much in the gospel scene. Mm-hmm. I'm not interested in being a celebrity on the gospel scene anymore. However, I really want to see what's going on with these young people, because I remember what it was like to be one of these young people. And this new chapter of gospel music came up that was not just strong on ministry values, but really also strong on artistic values, production values, and was backed up by a bunch of cool people. So Jogsi and Gospel Fathers had become Zaidi ya Muziki. Mm-hmm. Kiki was all up in that business. There was this rapper called Nashville. Mm-hmm. Linda Ogalo was getting on. DNG's stint was short, but it was like a punch to the industry. Like, take that. Here's another voice. Oh man, it was so freaking amazing. Man, I loved it so much. It was so good.
One of the best gospel albums. My Testimony
was a strong gospel album. Zaidi ya Muziki was a strong gospel album. All these people were turning out albums, not singles, but entire albums. What the hell is going on? But that didn't last very long because I had to leave Kenya.
So let's talk about you leaving. Like, what was that decision about?